Okay, so welcome to this webinar. I'm very pleased to say that we have Lizzie Bullock with us today. So Lizzie is a senior digital manager at English Heritage with a background in digital management. So previously worked for Victoria and Albert Museum and production manager at a media company, and before that a listings writer. So Lizzie was an undergraduate student back in 2003-2006 and completed an English Literature Master's degree back in 2006-2007. Before any further, Lizzie, what was your dissertation on when you did English Literature here at Warwick, just out of interest?
My undergraduate, I didn't actually at any point do a dissertation. I don't know if it's the same now, but at the time you could have the option just to do 4 modules each year and just do exams or papers for each of them. So I never did a dissertation, but my MA I focused on primarily on Shakespeare.
Okay, excellent. I wanted to ask you first of all a little bit about your role for those students and myself that perhaps don't know much about digital content management, but some of the students here today and more generally in, I imagine, humanities subjects might be thinking about a career in this sort of area. Can you just tell me a little bit about your role and what it sort of involves in a day-to-day and that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. So I work for the English Heritage's curatorial department. So sort of in the museum sector in general, the digital team will, for museums or heritage organisations, will normally look after that charity, that museum or charity's website, and to a smaller or lesser degree, depending on the organisation, things like apps, on-site digital experiences. So when you go to a place and you have interactives and videos and audio, that sort of thing, and that can vary from place to place. English Heritage is slightly different because we're so big, and we have over 400 sites. We have a couple of digital departments, and we have a department focused specifically on marketing, which look after the majority of the website with sort of like our visit message, encouraging people to come, and lots of information about visiting our sites, because we've got so many of them. But I work just with the curatorial department, so that's with our historians and curators, the people who look after the buildings and objects and sort of find out about the history behind them, and also our conservators who look after our objects. And so I work with them, and I have a small team, and we create content for the website that's sort of history content and sort of helping people understand more about our properties and the stories behind them. And then I also help out the interpretation team and the learning teams with more on-site digital stuff.
Okay, excellent. How have you found, in the time that you've been in the sector, how have you found it working in the arts sector and your sector in particular? So sort of with museums, charities, obviously now national heritage.
Is found it in terms of what it's like as a place, as a sector to work in? You think
Exactly,
like
yes.
what it's like? I really like it. I'm saying I've got a slow connection. Can you? Oh no, have you just lost me?
Yes, we have.
Sorry, having technical problems.
That's okay. There we go. It's okay. You're back. Oh no.
Can you see me? Okay.
Yes, no. I can. Sorry, go ahead. That's all
you
good.
You can see me. That's okay.
Yeah.
I can't currently see you, but as long as you can see me, that's the main thing.
Yes.
So I sort of got into this sector by accident. As you said before, I was working for a TV listings company, which is the job I got just after university. And I'd been there for about 5 years. And basically, I would say I'm very, very fortunate. I'd moved to London, and I used to really love going to museums in London. And a job came up that was an digital editorial job at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which happened to also be my favourite museum. So it was a bit of that was why I applied, because it was sort of my favourite place, and that was how I ended up. I was very fortunate, I got a job there. and which a lot of people, I acknowledge, who go into the heritage sector don't necessarily go in at their favourite place at the first time in. But so it was never sort of like necessarily my grand plan to go into this sector, but once I was in, I really, really liked it. I find it very rewarding, and it's very interesting to work with with history. Although my degree was in English, I've always been interested in sort of things from the past. So so the sort of the variety of things you get to work on when you work in the museum sector, and sort of the places you get to visit, the people you get to work with, I find it's really interesting. It's not necessarily the best paid sector, and you know, it has its challenges, and it is regularly underperforming. Sorry, not underfunded, I should say. It's not underperforming. So it's, my colleagues are now laughing around me, thinking that's a Freudian slip. It's not. We're performing very well. But I definitely, now I'm in this sector, I definitely don't want to leave it, and I'm sort of then, once I sort of have been at the V&A for a few years, I definitely wanted to sort of carry on within the heritage sector and sort of forge a career here, as it were.
So when you were looking back to when you were an undergraduate degree here at undergraduate Warwick, what made you decide to go on to study a master's degree, and why particularly in English? Did you consider changing discipline? You mentioned there that you have an interest in history. There may be some undergraduate thinking of changing discipline, which some do. Particular reason you decided to do a master's degree, and a particular reason you decided to do it in English?
So the reason I did it in English was because I really loved my subject, and the thing that I was really keen to carry on studying was Shakespeare, and Warwick being obviously really near Stratford and very good for Shakespeare, they have a very good reputation for Shakespeare. That was sort of why I chose to stay at Warwick and stay doing English. In terms of why I carried on to postgraduate study, I remember going before I when I was doing my third year of uni, before I decided to do an MA, I remember going to a seminar for people considering doing postgraduate study, and I remember them saying, don't do it because you don't want to leave, don't do it because you can't think of anything else to do. And I was sort of sat thinking, oh, that is partly why I'm doing it. I'm not going to lie, I really enjoyed being at university, and I wasn't necessarily ready yet to stop. And I partly, as a lot of people who have English degrees find, I didn't know what I wanted to do. It's quite a general subject. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to one particular career. So I didn't have like a sort of, as I've said before, like the career I have now, I didn't have that in mind. So it was very much primarily because I really loved my subject, and I didn't feel like ready to stop, and I really wanted to do that extra year and sort of take it to the next sort of level of sort of difficulty and complexity and stuff. I did think it would make me more employable, but that wasn't the main reason I did it. And I must say I was very fortunate in that my parents were able to help me fund my MA, so I didn't have to necessarily make that particular choice, and I recognize I'm very fortunate to have had that. But I think it was mainly because of just really loving the subject.
And after you graduated from your MA, you mentioned there that you sort of fell in, although you had an interest in the area, you fell into the sort of area of work to some extent. But when you finished, you mentioned there that you loved your subject, you wanted to extend your time at university, and then your MA finished. Had that time throughout your MA change your thought process, or what at the end of your MA when you're like, oh, I have to go get a job now? What we thought around your career, and what you got from that year as your MA, and how did it all fit together?
Yeah. So I had at the beginning of my MA thought, maybe this will become a PhD. It very much didn't. By the end of it, I was very, very ready to stop. It was a really good year, and I'm really glad I did it, but it was a very intense year, and I was exhausted by the end of it, because obviously it doesn't finish in the summer like a normal academic year did. It's sort of an intense almost a full calendar year. So again, like a lot of people who study English, even like when I'd done my master's, I was like, I still don't know what I'm going to do. I thought I like books. I'll try and get into publishing. And tried, and contrary to the fact that I currently live in London and have done for 10 years, I also very much didn't want to live in London. I'm very from the countryside, didn't think I wanted to move to London, so I thought I'll go into academic publishing, because that's based in places like Oxford and Cambridge and stuff. And I tried to get into that, but I didn't have enough experience, and you need that sort of break to get an entry level job. And I sort of tried for a few months and didn't. So I worked in, just got like a job working Waterstones for a few months, and then found out through a friend who actually also was on my MA course about this job writing TV listings, which is, I was like, that's words, it's editorial. I knew from the fact that I did like degrees that involved lots of writing and essays and stuff that I liked. I'm not very good at creative writing, but I like writing non-fiction, as it were, and that like, yeah, editing is something I really enjoy. So I was trying to get into that in some way, and so I ended up writing TV listings for 5 years, which is not a career choice I would recommend people make, as it was a horrible sector to be in. But it was, so unfortunately I had, unlike people who maybe do more vocational degrees, I didn't have a particular thing. You kind of, I imagine it's better now, but when I went to, when you go to careers advice and you get told, well, you've got an English degree, you could become a teacher, and like, don't really want to do that. So it was just sort of like words. I wanted to do something with words. And I mean, at the time, in terms of like my current career, I mean, not that 10 years ago was the dark ages in terms of digital, but 10 years ago was quite a long time in terms of websites and stuff. Like smartphones didn't exist back then and stuff, so I didn't even necessarily think that working in digital for the museum sector was an option. It wasn't even something I knew about when I left my degree, and it was only sort of later on that I found out that this was even a thing you could do. It just didn't even occur to me. So yeah, I just sort of thought I'll do something vaguely related to what I'm interested in and my skills, and sort of powered away at that for a bit, and then it worked out. So I'm not necessarily a good example of someone with a grand plan.
But it's interesting you say that. I think particularly humanities students do, myself included, you do finish undergraduate or postgraduate study. If you've kept in humanities, you want to do a PhD, you don't want to be a teacher, it is a bit like, what do you do? And it's interesting that you brought publishing, because I imagine a lot of English students that listen to this now might be considering that career. So it's just interesting to hear
and I'm
you went through.
I'm glad I didn't, because obviously in some areas of publishing are alive and well and resisting the sort of the march of digital. But I think in terms of kind of a future career, getting into digital things, and actually the TV listings I was doing were like online and on-screen TV listings, they weren't print. Getting into that was probably an area with more scope to expand than print publishing, which is obviously getting smaller and smaller. So it was sort of a happy accident that I ended up where I was.
And just thinking about your master's degree, further study, do you think further study really gave you anything? And I mean, not necessarily career. I mean, you talked a little bit about employability there, but did it form anything or solidify anything in your own mind? You mentioned you were definitely ready by the end of that to not do a PhD. So I guess I'm sort of thinking, because you now, I think, maybe years into career, something like that. So I guess I'm wondering, has it, throughout that time, has that further study given you anything personally or professionally?
Yeah, definitely. I just, I say, because although it wasn't necessarily vocational, I don't think that means that it hasn't helped my career. And I know that now when I'm recruiting people, while I may like a postgraduate degree won't necessarily be the deciding factor, but I definitely see it as added value in a candidate. And I think that probably for, maybe not for my TV listings job, but maybe when I went to the V&A and then here at English Heritage, I think having a master's degree and showing that I had, done, taken study onto another level, that I had done sort of, obviously it shows that you can commit to much bigger projects, that you can probably work on your own, that sort of thing. I think it does maybe not directly help your initial employability, but I think it is definitely added value to you as a candidate. But I think for me, I really enjoyed having a year spent studying something I love, and I'm really glad I had that, because you don't necessarily get the opportunity to do that very much when you get into the world of work. It's very hard to then go back. You can do it, but it's harder. So that carrying on it felt like I'm glad I did it at that time, and it felt like the right time to do it. And I kind of felt like I'd hit my stride at that point. That was the time when I really enjoyed the slightly more, although it was a taught MA, there was obviously still a lot of sort of having to work on your own, and particularly over the sort of the summer when I was writing paper after paper after paper, on my own and stuff. That going deeper into my subject I really enjoyed personally, but also I think gave me skills and gave me confidence in working on my own, handling big projects, and all that sort of stuff that just preparing me actually a bit for work in a weird way, because you do have to manage your time so much more closely, and you have to keep an eye on what you're doing, and suddenly have all these deadlines that you've got to meet and stuff, which that practice does come in handy for when you're in the big wide world.
And sort of thinking a little bit about that, you're touching on that at the end there. If you had to give advice to someone, so if you're thinking of a student, undergraduate finalist student now that's thinking of further study, or indeed someone who wants to work in that sort of sector, so digital content managing or digital publishing, what sort of advice would you give them, and what challenges do you foresee that they might have?
Oh gosh, I would say don't underestimate how much work postgraduate study can be. It's a lot. I remember as an undergraduate, I think the most, because I didn't do a dissertation, the most I'd ever written was like a 5,000 word paper, and then suddenly the first thing I had to write was 6,000 words, and that was your small critical theory paper, and everything else it was like 10,000 words, and I was suddenly like, well, this is and suddenly in a year I'm suddenly
I think we've just lost Lizzie there for a second. Let's see if we can get her back. Okay, I'll just so Lizzie, what advice would you give to any student who's thinking of entering further study, or if they want to work in the sort of sector that you work in, so digital media, sort of management, and sort of what challenges do you think the students, undergraduate finalist students, should be thinking of and be aware of going forward?
Yeah, so I think if in terms of challenges of postgraduate study, I would say it's incredibly rewarding, but it's a lot of work, and don't underestimate how much work it can be. It's particularly, actually, sounds really, really weird, but because you obviously, I say, you do a full year and you're sort of around over the summer, particularly if you're living on campus, it suddenly gets very quiet. It can be quite lonely. You're all of a sudden, you're sort of, there's no one around, everything's sort of shut down. There's just a few postgraduate students sort of bimbling around on campus, with no one around. And it can be, I would say, take advantage of any networks you can sort of make amongst other postgraduate students. Make sure you're sort of looking after each other, because it can be a lot of work and can be quite isolating. I sort of tell the story that I remember sitting towards the end of my MA, when I just had deadline after deadline, sitting in my friend's room, she was doing a history MA, and we were both just sort of knackered and really sort of like had been doing so much work, and I remember sitting on our bed and just going, why are we doing this? We could be earning a wage right now. why are we putting ourselves through this? And I don't regret it for a minute. It was really tough, and it was tiring, and obviously you're then knackered and you suddenly have to, unless you take a year out, you suddenly have to then start doing a job, and it's quite intense. So just prepare yourself for that. It's not like doing another year of undergraduate. It definitely is a step up. It's a step up in intensity. It's a step up in what's expected of you, and how much work you're going to have to do. You'll probably do more work than you've sort of ever done before. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means be aware of that fact. And in terms of getting into my particular sector, it's very difficult because, as I say, I kind of didn't get into it with any like. I'm a terrible example, and I have people ask me this, saying, how did you get your first job in heritage and to get it at a big national museum? And it sounds like a massive humble brag, but I did just apply for a job, and I had very much had transferable skills, and I very much recognised that I got lucky, and that the person who hired me at the V&A had actually been working in broadcasting before. She was a sort of head of digital, and so she sort of knew the kind of work I'd been doing for a media company. So and they were looking for new blood who actually weren't from our sector. So that was very fortunate. And sometimes you just need to get that lucky break. But for less typical examples and for less sort of lucky people than me, I would say start sort of at the bottom. You can also often transfer into in between sectors. If you're working in digital media, you sort of need an understanding to work in digital content. You need an understanding of you need to be able to write, you need to be able to edit, you need sort of good English and grammar. You also need to be able to show an interest in the sector, preferably something you can prove. Like lots of people do things like volunteering at their local museum. I know that's not necessarily something for everyone, but if you can sort of go to lots of exhibitions, like take advantage of what's going on in sort of the heritage museum sector to sort of show an interest, keep up to date with sort of the latest sort of developments in digital media, particularly in the heritage sector. Medium is actually a good website to look at, because lots of people who work in digital for heritage museums and heritage often sort of write about projects on Medium, on the website Medium. But kind of any editorial job can eventually lead into this kind of sector. But also think about like what particularly about the heritage sector is that you like and what you want to work in, because it could be digital content, but it could equally be learning, it could be interpretation, it could be marketing, and there's marketing departments always need people for things like social media if that's your particular skill. So in the sort of areas of things like digital and social, those kinds of areas and marketing, you often actually find that those are people who've not come from a heritage background, and they've come into the sector to sort of bring knowledge from elsewhere. So don't sort of think, I haven't got any experience in that, it's closed off to me. But sort of think widely around. There's lots of jobs in museums and heritage. There are also various schemes that are run, particularly if you're a BAME sort of candidate students. There lots of not lots, but there are paid internship programs that you can look out for that will help people get into the heritage sector. And there's also things like Arts Emergency, which helps sort of mentor people who are looking to get into sort of more creative, the creative sector, and get in touch. If you look on Twitter as well, there's a very active digital heritage community, and lots of people who maybe have got into digital or the heritage community, the heritage sector, with slightly more purpose than I did. who might be also, you know, they're often very, very willing to share their experience and how they got where they are and give advice and stuff. You know, they're really, again, a really friendly bunch. So it's worth looking at that as well.
It's really great advice. I just wanted to ask for the final question, which is a little bit more general, but I think it's one that's worth asking. Obviously, because you've gone through an undergraduate degree in English and then a postgraduate in English, so very much, and you work in the humanities field. This is a time when the humanities is sort of increasingly at risk. We're talking about education, so you know, the recruitment for applicants is going down. What I want to ask you is, as someone who has both studied both undergraduate and postgraduate level, and now works very much in the humanities, the charity sector, the arts sector, what do you feel is the importance of studying humanities and specifically English at postgraduate level?
I think it's really important, and it makes me, I know that I'm very, very fortunate to be of a generation that went to university, that while we did have tuition fees, they weren't of the level that they are now. And I know that sometimes that can be prohibitive or make people think that they need to get their money's worth and they need to go into a subject that will get them a job at the end of it, something that it seems more vocational. And I think that's a real shame, because this is the time in your life where you do get to study the thing that you're passionate about, and I think that's really worthwhile. And in a way, as I proved, I have, although I'm in the humanities sector, I have an English degree and my job title has digital in it, and I've never studied IT. I've never studied digital media. I don't know how to code. So don't think that, you know, if you have that English degree, you have to be a teacher, or you even have to be a journalist or an editor. There's lots of things that, you know, that the skills that you can build up that can take you into all sorts of things. It's just they maybe not immediately apparent. And I think the humanities, English, and as I sort of now know from working a lot in the history sector and previously at like my previous museum job in the arts sector, that you learn, like, humanities teach people empathy. You study other human beings and what makes them tick and what's made them tick in the past, and what then for might make them tick in the future. And it's a very hackneyed old thing to think about, like, you know, those who ignore the past are doomed to repeat it, something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but it does. I think it's the world would probably be quite a better place if more people read books, and both fiction and history books. I think we'd all have a bit of a better understanding of each other and the way things are going if more people studied humanities.
Lovely. Lizzie, thanks for your time.
You're very welcome.
Some really wonderful pearls of wisdom there. So thank you.
Try.